Okay, today is Friday, February 3rd, 2023, and they have released, they being ArenaNet, the February 14th Balance Update Preview. To be clear, this is a preview on what should be hitting Guild Wars 2 on February 14th, unless we whine and complain for them to make some changes to it. There was an hour-and-a-half long video where they went over these notes, which we just watched the whole thing on stream, and then they went over the notes themselves. Now, I will, of course, include in the description down below links to this if you do not want my sultry, charismatic voice to soothe you to sleep with it, but know that not everyone has good taste. So let's go over it. First of all, the notes are on the Guild Wars 2 forums, however, they are also on the wiki, which includes tooltips. So I'm mainly going to be using the wiki page to go over this just because it's got the tooltips, makes it a bit easier to read. Here we go. Hi all. Welcome to the preview for the February 14th Balance Update. As always, the goal of previewing these changes is to gather your feedback before the live release. We'll be following the conversation and making further adjustments as needed. So we have just shy of 2 weeks to essentially go on the forum post, which I will have linked down below, and give feedback. Keep it constructive, be nice, and say, I really don't think you should do this because, or I think you should also do this because. And, I've got my own post I'm going to put there about some stuff that I spotted that I think they overlooked. So, let's start with this. Mantras. In May 2021, we made a significant adjustment to the mantra skill type to adjust some pain points in their gameplay patterns, but this also caused mantras to lose most of their identity, gameplay depth, and even some functionality. I mean, they basically just made them ammo skills. We decided to take another look at the rework to find out what problems we need to solve, and if we could do it in a way that allows mantras to keep their original, unique aspects. The original goals behind the rework were focused on 2 ideas. First, recasting all of your mantras after you change maps or dying was not a fun experience. This primarily applied to Firebrand mantras, as Mesmer mantras grant a bonus upon finishing their initial cast time. During the initial investigation of the mantra rework, we considered simply allowing mantras to automatically prepare while out of combat in PvE maps. There was some concern about creating a functional difference between game modes, so we moved away from that idea and went with the more significant rework of what is in the game now. Since then, we've become more open to functional differences across game modes, and with this update, we've decided to implement the auto-preparation mechanic in PvE and return to mantra's unique mechanics. The other central idea was using a mantra's final charge was a mistake most of the time. This is commonly due to an imbalance between the value of the initial charges and that of the final charge, or in the case of Mesmer mantras, the on-cast effect. So really quickly, let's just take it from the top for people who might have just gotten into the game since the Steam release or something like that. The way the old mantras worked is if you slotted a mantra, first you would hit the button and your character would draw graffiti in the air, and then the button would flip over to a different button and it would have a couple charges. If you only used, say, the first charge, as long as there was 1 charge remaining after you used it, it would recharge the one that you used. However, if you used all the charges, if you used that final charge, it would go back to its first form, where you have to do the long etching in the air cast time to get it to flip back over again. Think of it like, your D&D wizard doing preparation before the battle or something like that. It was cool and it was novel, but again, it felt like if you used that last charge and caused it to flip back over to its I need to be prepared state, it felt like a mistake and you were being punished for that, because that last charge wasn't particularly impressive. Okay. During the... Oh, wait, no, we're down here. This is commonly due to an imbalance between the value of the initial charges and that of the final charge, or in the case of the Mesmer mantras, the on-cast effect, and is something that we feel can be addressed by tuning the differences of these skills. We don't want to fit the scales so far in the other direction that rushing through the mantras as quickly as possible is always optimal. There should be cases for each play pattern. Sometimes it will be correct to sit on the ammunition recharge, and sometimes it will be correct to use the final charge. We believe that the balance can be reached with the previous version of mantras, and with the primary issue resolved via auto-preparing Firebrand mantras, we decided to return all mantras to their old functionality. In summary, mantras will again need to be prepared before gaining access to their charges, but Firebrand mantras will have a more powerful final charge. Mesmer mantras will grant an effect upon finishing their initial casting time, and in PvE maps only, Firebrand mantras will automatically prepare if you're out of combat and they're not on cooldown. And they showed an example video of Roy standing in Lion's Arch, and he had skills that were not mantras. He swapped 2 mantra skills, and they immediately flipped over and became their prepared, ready-to-go versions. Okay, so going through everything. Elementalist. To improve the staff's support capabilities, we're bumping up the power on some of its weaker skills and increasing the usability of clunkier skills. We've also tuned up some of the cantrips that don't see much play to solidify them as a solid defensive option. On the competitive side, Scepter became a powerful threat following the last balance update, and we're making a few adjustments in those modes to bring it back in line. Burning Speed and Earth and Rush will now stop when you hit an enemy if there is one and not just go through it. Soothing Disruption, this trait no longer reduces the cooldown of cantrips. Pause there, we're in a little quick timeout. A recurring theme in these patch notes is there's a lot of traits that used to reduce the cooldown of a type of skill by 20%, and they're taking out that 20% and just giving it to you for free in most cases, with a few exceptions, I believe. So this is one of them. Reduce the cooldown, no longer reduce the cooldown of cantrips. Lightning Flash has half the cooldown in PvE. Cleansing Fire is now an ammo skill and grants you might each time it removes a condition. Armor of Earth, this skill now grants barrier for each unique boon on the user in addition to the effects it already did. Reduce the duration from 6 seconds to 4 in PvP. Reduce the cooldown from 60 seconds to 40 in PvP. Ether Renewal, reduce the casting time from 2.75 to 2.25 seconds. Reduce the cooldown from 18 to 15. Flame Burst now inflicts blind in addition to burning from the staff. Burning Retreat, reduce the cooldown from 20 to 18, very small change. Water Blast can now target allies. Now, I believe this one can also be targeted on the ground. However, you can target allies with this as well if you just want to heal them directly. Geyser, increase the healing attribute scaling from 1.0 to 1.25 in PvP and World v. World. Frozen Ground skill now grants Frost Aura to allies in the area when the field is created. No combo necessary just to give them that aura. That's pretty awesome. Healing Rain, the skill now heals allies for each condition removed, and this second part is in PvE only. It cures double the conditions. As a support enjoyer, that is awesome for fights like Slothosaur, where there's just constantly conditions to remove from your allies. Not only are you removing them more quickly, but you're also pumping out more healing as you remove them. That's awesome. Gust is now ground targetable. Windborne Speed now grants super speed in addition to the other effects. Transmute Earth now grants stability instead of protection, and it increases the boon application radius from 240 to 600. Dragon's Tooth, Water Trident, and Blinding Flash were all of the skills from the Scepter that they said felt too strong. For anyone who doesn't know, Catalyst has been kind of in PvP lately. A lot of it was Scepter. There was one team that did pretty well in the monthly automated tournament. There was just 5 Catalysts. And you really shouldn't have anything be at the level where everybody just wants to play 5 of that. But Dragon's Tooth, ever since it got its homing ability, it kind of feels like you have to save a dodge roll for Dragon's Tooth, but Dragon's Tooth cools down almost twice as fast as a dodge roll does, so they eventually break you, and of course they're hitting you the whole time with other stuff. So they've nerfed Dragon's Tooth slightly. Its power scaling has gone down from 2.0 to 1.5. Personal opinion, I don't think that's going to be enough. I would expect another nerf for this in the future, but we will see what happens. Water Trident has lost an ammo. Blinding Flash has also lost an ammo, and the weakness duration slightly reduced. Stone Sheath reduced the duration of Tectonic Shift by 1 second. Conjurer, this trait no longer reduces the cooldown of conjured weapon abilities. Tempest specific change. This trait now causes overloads to pulse the alacrity while channeling, in addition to granting alacrity when the channeling is completed. Now, I don't play my Tempest very often. However, I know many Tempest players. Back when Druids got access to alacrity, Tempest got access to alacrity. I heard from many of them that being a Tempest and giving alacrity is not fun gameplay. If anything interrupted your ability to do an overload, your alacrity would fall off and your group would hate it. For those that don't play Tempest, essentially they would, just imagine it's long cast time, long cast time, long cast time, there's the alacrity. Long cast time, long cast time, long cast time, there's the alacrity. That's basically what you need to know. And so if anything forced you to have to dodge, or you got CC'd or stunned or something for a split second, that alacrity might fall off your group, and then they didn't like it. So now it pulses the alacrity during that long cast time, and if you're forced to dodge halfway through, you still got half of it. This looks like a nice change. I hope that's enough. The amount of alacrity gained in total is the same. They spread it out over the course of that cast bar. Weaver. Superior elements, critical chance granted by this trait has been increased from 10 to 15% in PvE. Just to save some breath here, all of this is PvE only. Increase the power coefficients of Cauterizing Strike, Charge Strike, Polaric / Call Lightning, Polaric Leap, Sichi, Clapotis. I think they've got a cream for that. Breaking Wave, Aqua Siphon, Twin Strike, and Shearing Edge have all had their power coefficients or healing coefficients increased in PvE. In the case of this one, it's base healing, not coefficient. But all of these are bigger numbers in PvE. Weave Self, Woven Air, and Perfect Weave now grant increased strike damage in addition to their other effects. Catalyst, Fortified Earth, reduced the base the barrier from 2,500 to 1,200, about half in PvP only, and Elemental Celerity increased the cooldown from 60 seconds to 75 in PvP only, and Deployed Jet Sphere, it's missing its tooltip, increased cooldown from 10 seconds to 15 seconds in PvP only. And again, Catalyst, very, very strong in PvP right now. I do not know if this will be enough, but time will tell. But that's the changes for Ellie. So, Engineer. The Engineer update focuses on usability improvements. Some boons and additions from the mechanical mech's skills were being applied by the Engineer rather than the mech itself. While addressing this issue, we wanted to ensure that the mech would maintain its current effectiveness. For anyone who might be confused on that statement, basically, it's like, oh wait, this skill is coming from the Engineer. It's supposed to be coming from the mech. Oh, well now it's coming from the mech. Well, the mech has a different level of concentration, and now the boon's not staying up. It's stuff like that. They're trying to make sure that stuff is coming from the source it's supposed to come from, but then also by fixing this, it doesn't cause other problems because the mech has different stats than the Engineer does. We fixed some issues that prevented certain condition duration traits from affecting the mech. We're also relaxing the timing on the mech's out of range penalty, giving players a bit more flexibility when moving away. We've also cleaned up the animation timing on main hand pistol to make the weapon feel a bit more fluid to use. In competitive modes, we're taking another look at improving Bruiser Scrapper builds and bringing back one of its more iconic defensive traits in Rapid Regeneration. So going through these bit by bit. Fragmentation Shot, the aftercast duration is reduced by 25%. Essentially, your one skill on pistol will fire faster. Poison Dart Volley, sped up the animation by 66%. I think in total it's going from 1.75 seconds animation to 1.25. Dart Volley is basically, I think it's 5 shots, it's just bang, 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 bang. Now it'll just fire more quickly. It finishes the cast more quickly. Utility Goggles increases the number of damaging conditions removed from 1 to 2. This is a passive, this is the active Utility Goggles. So they're trying to make this a little bit more attractive trait because it's not used very often. Scrapper, Reconstruction Field, reduced the cooldown from 25 seconds to 20 in PvP and World v World game modes. Chemical Field, reduced the cooldown from 25 to 20. Damage Dampener is gone. A long time ago, Rapid Regeneration was replaced with Damage Dampener, and they're going back. Rapid Regeneration will heal the Scrapper every second that they're under the effect of Swiftness or Super Speed. I don't know the exact numbers. I'm reminded very much of Rugged Growth on Ranger, a trait that heals us every second that we have Protection, which is actually a very strong trait, key part of the Ranger's ability when they're like hand-kiting Deimos and they're just taking heavy damage every single second. Rugged Growth is providing a ton of healing during that time. But yeah, we'll see how strong it is, but that is coming back. Applied Force increased the bonus power per might stack from 15 each to 20 each in PvE game modes. Mechanist fixed an issue that caused the Engineer to be the source of boons and conditions for several mech skills instead of the mech itself. Crashdown fixed an issue that caused melee auto attacks to be slower than intended, reduced the range of the first 2 melee strikes from 240 to 130. Mech frame channeling conduits increase the concentration inherited by the mech from 100 to 150%. So this goes hand in hand. They said that this goes hand in hand with them trying to fix it to where certain boons were coming from the Mechanist, which should have been coming from the mech. However, after fixing that, and making them properly come from the mech, they were concerned that the mech might not have enough concentration to keep the boons up that you expect it to. So concentration changed to the mech. Mechanical Genius increased duration of the boons applied by Mechanical Genius from 6 seconds to 10. And Chemical Rounds, which is a trait that increases your condition damage slightly, fixed an issue that prevented the Condi damage from the skill being inherited by the mech. So the Engineer was getting the condition damage buff, but the mech was not getting it, which it was supposed to, and that's getting fixed. Serrated Steel now functions with the mech when it is active. Incendiary Powder, this trait now functions with the mech while it is active. The trait cooldowns for the mech are separate from the Engineer. Now, Incendiary Powder is a skill I like to use in PvP from time to time. It increases the duration of any burning you do slightly, and also, I believe every 10 seconds, your next attack will apply a burn. Yes, 10-second cooldown, next hit applies a burning. With condition damage, it'll be at least double this, like 2,000. So similar, but not nearly as powerful as aim-assisted rocket. I believe this means the mech will periodically apply an extra burn, and you will also periodically apply one also. So that would be a slight optional buff to condition damage mechanist. PvP or PvE could possibly make use of that. Going into Guardian. Terra Hunter Tiger, thank you for the raid. Power Guardian builds still aren't quite at the level we want them to be in PvE after the previous balance update, and we're making some additional improvements to Greatsword Sword and Focus to improve their damage potential. One of our goals with the Mantra update is to make the final charge of Firebrand Mantras a bit more of a compelling option, and as a part of that, we've made an adjustment to weighty terms that makes the final charge skills restore a page to the Firebrand. We've also tuned up some skills in PvE where Firebrand is still struggling to find its footing. So again, in the olden days, using that last charge of the mantra felt like you made a mistake and you were now punished for it. So now using that last charge can be a, oh crap, I need another page now, and you can trade your last charge, your mantra, for getting another page back. Which is nice. I think that's a good idea. Time will tell if that's how that turns out. So core changes. PvE is all this. PvE Strike slightly buffed, Vengeful Strike slightly buffed, Wrathful Strike slightly buffed. Whirling Wrath no longer slows you down. And they showed video of the Beyblade-looking Guardian just spinning and going very fast through the PvP area, and I'm terrified. Symbol of Resolution, PvE damage buff, Sword Wave PvE damage buff, Symbol of Blades, PvE damage buff, reduce cooldown by 2 seconds, Ray of Judgment, PvE damage buff, Zealot's Defense, reduce the cooldown from 15 seconds to 12, Symbol of Protection, reduce the cooldown, casting time from 1.3 to 0.9, Zealot's Embrace, skill now grants barrier when you hit an enemy. Banish, this skill now marks the enemy for 5 seconds. If you then use Mighty Blow, you consume the mark to teleport to the target. And they showed video footage of a Guardian using a hammer and just basically slapping the guy. The guy got sent flying, and then the Guardian raised the hammer, teleported to him, and hit him again like he was Goku. And it was like the Mighty Blow was almost a guaranteed follow-up. And they showed that many times. Again, I'm very scared. Right Hand Strength, this trait no longer reduces the recharge of main hand sword skills. And again, that's because they're just including that on many of them now. This is a recurring theme through these notes. Unscathed Contender reduced the strength damage increase while under the effects of Aegis from 20% to 7%. They felt like it was a bit unreasonable to expect you to have Aegis all the time, but when you did have it all the time, this was a bit overpowered. This trait will give you 7% damage when you have Aegis, and an additional 7% when you're above 90% health. So 14 total if you meet all the requirements. Dragon Hunter. Test of Faith increased the protection duration from 2 seconds to 4 in PvP. Light's Judgment, the first strike of this skill, will now daze enemies in addition to other effects, reduce the cooldown from 30 to 20. Wings of Resolve, cooldown reduced from 30 to 25. Shield of Courage, cooldown reduced from 60 to 50. Fragments of Faith, reduce cooldown from 60 to 45 in PvP and World v World. Reduce stability duration from 5 seconds to 4 in those same game modes. Hunter's Determination. This trait has been reworked. It now causes all elite skills to break stuns on activation. So just imagine the most terrifying Guardian elite skill you can think of, and just imagine it now as a stun break also. And yeah, we will not be sleeping at night. Heavy Light. Reduced internal cooldown from 10 seconds to 1 second, so it can proc more often. Firebrand. Exiting a Firebrand tome now puts a half-second cooldown on the tome. Now, I'm sure some of you are like, what? Why? Who cares? The reason for that is sometimes if you, like, maybe had a little bit of latency and you were tapping the key a couple times trying to get it to go off, you might accidentally leave the tome and immediately re-enter the tome, and you're just trying to leave the thing. So they added this half-second cooldown so that if you did like a double tap and there was some latency, you didn't just weapon swap right back. Chapter 2 Igniting Burst increased the weakness duration from 2 seconds to 3 PvP. Heated Rebuke reduced the page cost from 2 to 1 in PvP. Radiant Recovery reduced the cooldown from 8 to 6 in PvP. Shining River increased the base pulse heal quite a bit, almost double, in PvP only. Increased the pulse heal attribute scaling from 0.2 to 0.25 in PvP only. Epilogue Eternal Oasis reduced the page cost from 3 to 2 in PvP. And Unbroken Lines increases the number of stability stacks from 1 to 2 in PvP only, not World v World. Firebrand mantras now require an initial casting time to prepare the mantra charge, as the final charge of each mantra is more powerful. They will now automatically swap to their charge state when not on cooldown and when the player is out of combat on PvE maps only. So in PvP, if you're using mantras and you die and you come out of the respawn, as I understand it, you would still need to reactivate them all while you're running out of the spawn. But in PvE maps, if you're not in fight or you finish a fight, they should just pop back up once they're done cooling down. Weighty Terms will now only trigger on the final charge of a mantra, and it will restore a page in addition to its current effect. This trait no longer has an internal cooldown at all. Are these patch notes posted anywhere? I'll give you the link that I'm using right now. There you go. Willbender virtues no longer remove the active effects of other Willbender virtues. This means currently, I should say, if you do like F2, F1, the F2 will activate, then the F1 will activate, remove the F2, and then you've only got the F1 active. With this change, you'll be able to F3, F2, F1, and then all three of those are active at once. And you're very scary for a time. Mesmer. When is the last time I ate bacon? Last weekend. I went to Waffle House. Thank you for asking. Mesmer. While reviewing Mesmer's mantras, we felt that many of the effects granted upon finishing the initial cast could be more powerful, and in those cases we've added an additional bonus for nearby allies. We've also made some usability improvements to Shield and added additional options for group might to help make both quickness focus and alacrity focused Chronomancer builds more competitive with other support picks. Core Mesmer. Master Manipulation. This trait no longer reduces the recharge of manipulation skills and now grants Aegis to allies instead of Super Speed. Mirror. Reduced cooldown from 15 to 12 in PvE and from 20 to 15 in competitive. Mimic. Reduced cooldown from 30 to 20. Mass Invis. Reduced cooldown from 60 to 48 in PvE, 75 to 60 in competitive. Time Warp. The skill now also grants Super Speed to allies and Chill to enemies. Reduce cooldown from 120 to 75 in competitive. Big changes to Time Warp. Decoy, reduce the cooldown from 45 to 40 in competitive. Mirror Images, reduce cooldown from 35 to 30 in competitive. Mesmer Mantras now require an initial casting time to prepare. The effects they grant when completing initial cast are as follows. Mantra of Recovery will heal yourself and heal nearby allies for a lesser amount. Mantra of Concentration gives boons to you and nearby allies. Distraction will reduce the recharge time of Diversion. Pain will grant might to you and nearby allies. Resolve will remove all conditions from yourself and remove fewer conditions from nearby allies. Egotism trait increased the damage bonus from 5 to 10% in competitive. Protected Phantasms. This trait was replaced with Temporal Enchanter. Temporal Enchanter will causes glamour skills to grant super speed and resistance to allies in the area and increases the glamour durations by 1 second. Chronomancer. Echo of Memory. Deja Vu. These skills will now immediately summon the Phantasm when successfully blocking an attack. If no attack is blocked, then the Phantasm will be summoned at the end of the channel. So this means you no longer, like if you block an attack, you no longer need to worry about like channeling it all the way to the end as you did before. They made special mention of this, but if you fail to block an attack, you can just hold the shield, hold the block up until the end of it to get that summon that you want. Tides of Time, catching the returning wave while under the effects of Continuum Split, will now also reduce the recharge of this skill after exiting Continuum Shift. Increase the number of might stacks from 5 to 8 in PvE only. Well of Action will now grant Might and Fury to allies on its final pulse in addition to Super Speed. Well of Senility now dazes enemies on its final pulse in addition to removing boons. Virtuoso Change, Psychic Riposte, fixed an issue in which the unblockable effect would not apply to the entire shatter, which this was just a fix. This was something that they wanted to happen, but it wasn't happening. Lots of changes, chat. We're halfway through it. Necromancer. We're improving the Reaper's Shout skills, which now will do increased damage and gain additional effects when striking enemies in melee range, rewarding players for diving deep into the fray. So there is a common theme with all of these. Shouts do X, but if you're in melee range, it does X plus Y. And you'll see the details in a second. Warhorn will also see improvements, with Whale of Doom once again being unblockable. Now, Whale of Doom used to be a CC, and then a different CC, and they changed it to a Fear. And when they changed it to a Fear, they made it blockable because they thought unblockable Fear would be too scary. And then they made a joke about Fear is scary, so they're giving it unblockable back. So Whale of Doom is once again unblockable, and the cooldown reduction from Banshee's Wail is just rolled into a baseline, allowing a wider range of Necro builds to take Warhorn without being tied to the Blood Magic trait line. Banshee's Wail. This trait no longer reduces the cooldown of Warhorn skills, as mentioned. Whale of Doom is now unblockable, reduce the cooldown from 30 to 24 without the trait. Locust Swarm, reduce cooldown from 30 to 24. Necrotic Stab and Bite, these are, actually these next few things are all dagger skills. Increase the power coefficient, but also doubled the life force generation from Stab. Increase the life force generation from Bite from 6 to 8. Life Siphon, reduce the cooldown from 10 to 8, and increase the damage bonus against bleeding foes from 20 to 50% in PvE only. That last part is PvE only. Dark Pact, this skill now inflicts bleeding on the target and grants life force to the caster for each boon removed. This skill now removes boons instead of corrupting them in PvP and World vs. World. Increase the number of boons removed from 1 to 3 in PvP, 1 to 2 in World v World, and 2 to 3 in PvE. So they felt like it did a little bit of everything. It felt like it did too much. It did the with the corruption plus the other thing, they felt like they couldn't buff how many boons it removed. So by removing the corruption, they increase how much boon removal it does. Some people will like that, some people won't, but that's how they chose to go. Reaper. Augury of Death no longer reduces the recharge rate of Shout skills. Soul is Mine does damage and grants additional life force per enemy struck within melee range of the caster of the Shout. Reduce the cooldown from 20 to 16. Nothing Can Save You no longer grants additional unblockable attacks on all enemies struck, and now does additional damage and grants additional unblockable attacks when striking targets within melee range of the caster. Reduce cooldown from 20 to 16, baseline. Rise. One of my favorites, this skill now deals additional damage and summons additional horrors when striking targets within melee range of the caster. The max number of horrors that can be summoned is 5. Reduce cooldown from 40 to 32 seconds. I think some of the notes here are missing. They showed a slide during the show that we watched, and it said, I believe the max number of horrors was 5 in PvE and 3 in competitive. So like you might hit 1 target, but if it was in melee range, you might get 2 or 3 horrors instead of the 1. You're not going to get more than the old maximum number of horrors, but it's now easier to reach the maximum number of horrors, if memory serves. Okay, and then of course cooldown reduced. Rise's best shout, by the way. The skill now, Suffer. The skill now deals additional damage and transfers 1 additional condition to target struck within melee range of the caster. Reduce the cooldown from 2016. You Are All Weaklings. The skill now deals additional damage and grants more might when striking targets within melee range of the caster. Reduce the cooldown from 25 to 20 seconds. Chilled to the Bone. The skill deals additional damage, stun, and condition damage. It grants you additional boons when striking targets within melee range of the caster. Reduce the cooldown from 45 to 36 seconds. Chilling Victory. Reduce the cooldown of it from 2 seconds to 1 second in PvP. And Blighter's Boon will now also trigger when removing a boon from an enemy, giving it more flexibility and usefulness. Ranger. We have rolled a few of Ranger's cooldown reduction traits into the baseline cooldown reduction for those skills, same as everybody else, creating additional builds in which the skills can be taken at a higher level of effectiveness. Primal Cry will now inflict poison in addition to its other conditions, adding some synergy to Ranger's poison skills and providing a slight improvement for condition-based soul-based builds. So really quick pause there. Primal Cry is when a soul beast merges with a pet, they get a few additional abilities. Primal Cry is when they merge with most of the condition-based animals, and it's the thing, it looks like they scream, and it does some bleeding and vulnerability to people around you. It's not huge damage, but it's not a projectile, so it's nice sometimes, like if you're fighting something that's got blocked projectiles, and for a few seconds you can't hit them, you can do the scream and apply some conditions in the area. Now it also will do poison on there. For competitive modes, we have made some improvements to Wilderness Survival trait line and tuned up Soul Beast stances to improve Ranger builds that are focused on attrition and survival over raw burst damage. And that's me. That's me, chat. I don't like playing Sick'em Soul Beast, killing you 2 seconds. Similar to how my wife plays The Sims when she uninstalls the ladder when someone is in the pool. I like to watch the light fade from their eyes as I dump 27 stacks of Vipers on top of them and just watch as they realize that there is nothing they can do. So, starting off, Core, Empathic Bond. This trait has been reworked. It now causes Beast skills to remove conditions from the Ranger and their pet. Beast skills being the F2 skill if your pet's not merged with you, and if you are merged with your pet, then there's a different one based on each of the pets. Rugged Growth, the pulse heal increased from 155 to 196. Now, Rugged Growth actually applies a substantial amount of healing if you have protection. It's a heal every second you have protection. Now, you can't get 100% protection uptime in PvP running around as a ranger all by yourself, but you can take some other traits that give you protection and then make use of this. Windborne Notes no longer reduces the cooldown of Warhorn skills. Hunter's Call, that's Warhorn 4, and Call of the Wild Warhorn 5, getting 20% shaved off. Wilderness Knowledge no longer reduces the cooldown of survival skills. So the main thing of Wilderness Knowledge is going to be that survival skills will still remove 2 conditions and give you the Fury buff. I've mentioned this before. Anyone who watches my stream a lot knows this. I really don't like Wilderness Knowledge because it's too good. It has been a staple of Ranger PvP builds for a majority of the time this game has been out because it's so good. It's so good. It's you like some of the best Ranger builds is just like Troll Unguent and then 3 survival stun breaks. Or like Quickening Zephyr, Lightning Reflexes, and then maybe like Protect Me for the last one. Sorry, there's 2 survival stun breaks. And then like, you could bring a Tingle or something else. And then every single one of your 6 through 0 skills cure 2 conditions, or 4 in the case of the Unguent if you've got the other trait. It's so good. So now it'll reduce the cooldown on that stuff, which is kind of nice, because then if you're not taking that, you can still get the reduced cooldown of Lightning Reflexes or Quickening Zephyr without taking that tree. But yeah, it's mandatory. That's right, Sleeping Betty. It's been mandatory for a long time. So, okay, continuing on. Troll Unguent reduced the cooldown, of course. In game modes, Lightning Reflexes, reduce cooldown, Muddy Terrain, reduce cooldown. Quickening Zephyr, reduce the cooldown from 45 to 35 seconds PvE and 40 seconds to 32 in PvP World v World. I feel like, hold on a sec, let me go back to the official notes here. I'm pretty sure there's a few notes there. No, they are copied from this. Okay. I believe that they said that Muddy Terrain was not getting the reduced cooldown in World v World unless you took the trait, because it was so good. I could be mistaken on that. I'm pretty sure they said that during the broadcast, but it looks like it didn't make it into the written notes. So now I'm doubting myself. But if you care about Muddy Terrain, know that that is a possibility. Quickening Zephyr reduced the cooldown in PvE and in PvP World v World. Entangle reduced the cooldown from 60 to 48 in competitive. Brutish Seals no longer reduce the cooldown of Signet skills, just like all the other stuff, but now grants Might in addition to Fury. Signet of the Hunt, this active component of this skill, now grants super speed in addition to the unblockable attacks. Reduce the cooldown from 40 to 20 seconds. Now, it does not list what game modes. I'm assuming all of them, but I do not know. Signet of Renewal now grants Resolution to the Ranger's pet in addition to Resistance. Reduce cooldown from 50 to 35 seconds. Oh my god, Signet of PETA, finally getting revisited. So, for those that don't know, back in the day, the Resistance boon would basically make you immune to condition damage until it wore off. And what Signet of Renewal did was it would take all of the conditions off of allies in the area and move them all to your pet. And then it would give your pet resistance to try to survive it, unless someone boon removed the pet. However, they changed resistance to no longer block condition damage. It just blocks like the non-damaging conditions. Like when I say blocks, you basically ignore them. Like you're not immobilized if you have immobilize on you, stuff like that. So ever since they made that change, they didn't do anything to the skill. So now you hit it, all the conditions go to your pet, and then and then there's an explosion of feathers. So thus, Signet of PETA was born. And it's just been that way for like 6+ months. I'm glad they're finally coming back to it. There is another issue with this trait, and I'm going to leave feedback on here that I would like to see them fix this. Signet of Renewal is an excellent skill. It's like a much weaker version of the pulsing heal signet from the Mechanist, but it also is a stun break and a condition cleanse. However, the condition cleanse fails if your pet's not within 600 units of you. And it doesn't have a range check. Really quickly, and maybe I can teach a few people out there something. If I click on this person, you see this red line down here? That means they're out of range of that skill. If I untarget them, red line's gone. That's what that means. It would never show a red line under Signet of Renewal if your pet's out of range of you. But then if you use it for a condition cleanse, because you got 40 poisons on you, it would use it, your pet's too far away, doesn't cure you, and then you goes on cooldown and you die. So that's some of the feedback I'm going to leave as someone who's extensively played Ranger. I would like to see that fixed. It's been broken for a long time. Signet of the Wild, they reduced the cooldown from 40 to 30 seconds. Soul Beast. Double Arc, this is the dagger skill, reduced the cooldown from 7 to 6 seconds in competitive. Instinctive Engage, reduced ammo recharge from 15 seconds to 12 in competitive. Dolyak Stance. Now, Dolyak Stance, if you look at the stun breaks of all forms of Ranger, Dolyak Stance is probably the strongest one. It's a stun break, it gives you damage reduction, and it is a source of stability. Long ago, I think it had like a 30-second cooldown, then they upped it to 60, and I understand why. It's a stun break and stability and damage reduction. It's very, very strong. However, the thing is, once it became like a 60-second cooldown, it started seeing a lot less use, because you could take something like Lightning Reflexes, which with the trait had like a 26-second cooldown or something like that, and it's just more. You could use it more than twice as often. So it was hard to justify bringing Dolyak Stance. So they're taking it down back to 40 seconds from 60 in PvP, and we'll see what that does to it. But they're also reducing the duration of it by 2 seconds as well. Moa Stance, reduced the cooldown from 40 to 30 seconds in PvP. Griffin from 30 to 25 in PvP. Primal Cry, again, this is when the Soul Beast is merged with certain condition-based animals, and they do the Scream, which just hits the area around them with bleeding and vuln. Now it also does poison. Eternal Bond increased the base heal from 487 to 584. I don't see... Hold on. Wasn't there a thing about Eternal Bond and condition cleansing? Eternal Bond. Am I crazy? Or was that, maybe that didn't make it into the notes either. Give me 1 second here. Pretty sure that was in... Or no, it was Empathic Bond. Did the note on Empathic Bond make it in? Or did I already cover that? Yes, Mike, you are crazy. Thanks, buddy. Oh, it was up here at the top. I don't remember if I skipped this or not. But yeah, Empathic Bond was one of the Grandmaster trait options of Wilderness Survival. And now, when you use a Beast skill, it will cure conditions. Now, one thing on this that I definitely didn't mention since starting recording this, they did say that it will have a cooldown, so you can't abuse it with birds. And for those that don't know, there are some pets that the Beast skill is like a 1-minute cooldown, and then birds, their Beast skill has a 6-second cooldown. So you can't abuse it with birds for 6-second cooldown condition cleanse, but it will cooldown instantly on pet swap. So if you need to, you could like Beast skill, pet swap, Beast skill to really quickly get multiple condition cleanses. I believe it's 2 per, so it'd be 2, swap 2 for a total of 4 if you exhaust that. Hey, Chip. Okay, I'm not even talking to me right now. Okay, so continuing on. Untamed. Unnatural Transversal is no longer instant and has a casting time of 0.25 seconds. Now, they said they're going to keep a close eye on this. There's been a lot of instances. I mean, the main way of using this is start casting Maul, Unnatural Transversal, and bring it slamming down and crush them. Or start casting the Cage Transversal and drop the Cage right around them. Basically, use it while in the middle of a cast time of a different skill so that the enemy has less time to react to it because you just drop it right on top of them. So they're adding this to change that gameplay, and they want to see how that changes things. Okay, Revenant. Vindicator is still overperforming relative to where we want it to be in PvP. With other top elite specializations like Spellbreaker and Catalyst seeing some reductions, we wanted to make sure to bring down Vindy as well, and we're continuing to pull back on some of the damage improvements that were made following the end of Dragon's launch when Vindicator was still struggling with access to one dodge. We'd like to see Vindy builds move into more offensive trait choices to make up for the loss in damage instead of remaining a damage threat while focusing on defensive skills. Core change. Resilient Spirit. Reduce the barrier per unique boon from 160 to 119 in PvP. Renegade specific changes. Kala's Favor. Increase power damage bonus per stack from 1% to 2% in competitive. Heroic Command. Lasting Legacy. Increase the might duration from 6 to 9 seconds in competitive. Bloodbane Path, increase power coefficient from strike damage slightly. In competitive, 7-shot, increase the power coefficient from 0.24 to 0.265 in competitive. Now, just to be clear, what I'm about to say is not like, oh god, the sky is falling, but 7-shot still gives me, it like wakes me up in a cold sweat at night. Some of us old-timers will remember the days when 7-shot just basically, it hit you and it just deleted your System 32 files. Like, you were just, it just hit you right in the game installation. It was bad. It was bad. That skill still brings back PTSD. Endless Enmity. This trait no longer requires the enemy to be under a certain health threshold. Reduced Fury duration from 6 seconds to 4. Fury is also applied to nearby allies. Brutal Momentum. This trait now grants a 10% increased critical hit chance when endurance is not full. The 33% increased critical chance when endurance is full is unchanged. Vindicator specific changes. Phantom's Onslaught, reduce the power coefficient slightly in PvP. True Strike, reduce the power... You know what, hold on, let's just summarize this. True Strike, Spear of Archimedes, Nomad's Advance, and Scavenger Burst. The power coefficients of all of these were slightly nerfed in PvP. Imperial Impact, the attack from this trait no longer inflicts chill in PvP and World v World. Reduce the power coefficient from 0.625 to 0.5 in PvP only. Drink of water. Okay. Thief. Rifle saw some improvements in the last balance update, but it's still getting outshined by Dagger and most power Deadeye builds. We do want Rifle to be a viable pick, and we're bumping up the damage a bit more. We've also made a usability improvement to Deadeye's Mark, which will no longer be lost when entering the down state. Spectre is another support build of PvP that struggles with might generation compared to some other options. We have shifted self-only might from Shadow Sap into AoE might, and bumped up the might on Will of Bounty with the goal of making an Alacrity-focused Spectre build more competitive. However, they did say they don't want it to be too easy for one person to just pump out 25 stacks of might. So you'll see that in a second. All right, Core Thief. Signets of Power, this trait is reworked and now causes blah blah blah. It doesn't reduce the cooldown of Signet skills the same. Now causes Signet skills to grant initiative when activated. Malice, reduce cooldown from 15 to 12. Shadows, reduce cooldown. Infiltrator Signet, reduce cooldown. Reduce cooldown. Trickster, this trait no longer reduces the cooldown of trick skills. Increase the number of conditions removed from 1 to 2. Caltrops, reduce cooldown. Haste, reduce cooldown. Roll for initiative, reduce cooldown. Also reduces the initiative gain from 6 to 4 in competitive. Skelk Venom, reduce cooldown. Keen Observer, reduce the health threshold requirements from 90% to 75% in PvE only. Daredevil. I thought this one was weird, I'm gonna be honest with you. Steal is no longer replaced by Swipe when the Daredevil specialization is equipped. Now there is a note here that was in the video that I don't see in the notes, and I believe the full note was Steal is no longer replaced by Swipe, but has a 5-second shorter cooldown. So your Steal has a shorter cooldown when you're a Daredevil. However, a lot of people liked Swipe because it was unblockable. It was shorter range, unblockable, but you know now it's longer range, but it is blockable. So I know a couple Daredevils in my chat were not happy about that change, but that's what they're doing. Impairing daggers, reduce the cooldown from 25 to 18 seconds. Impact strike, reduce cooldown again. And Deadeye specific changes. Now, one thing they specifically talked about with Deadeye is they didn't like that if a Deadeye, they go downstate for a second, and then they get saved. An ally quickly revives them. Their mark is gone, and their malice is reset. No longer. If someone was marked and you go downstate for a second, but someone manages to save you, your mark is still there as long as it didn't expire. And your malice is still there as long as it didn't expire. So Deadeye's mark is no longer removed when you go downstate. Everything after this is bad news. Okay, in PvE only, the coefficients of brutal aim, deadly aim, skirmisher shot, spotter shot, double tap, 3-round burst are improved. They're doing a bit more damage on all of those in PvE. Shadow Meld no longer removes revealed. Now, I get why they did this, but at the same time, I'm like, whoo, yikes. So, revealed is the counterplay to stealth. You know, it is literally the one thing that is aimed at countering stealth. And this is a move that removes stealth and also, it removes revealed and it also stealths you. It's literally the counter to the counter. And there's like nothing against it. So I get it. I get why they did that. However, it's still like, ugh, okay, well, we'll see what they do. We'll see what they do. Okay, Spectre. Shadow Sap. The enemy targeted version of this skill will now give might in an area around the Spectre. The ally targeted version of the skill now grants protection. Well of Silence was reworked. It now dazes enemies on the initial strike. They said they didn't like that it was just pulsing daze. Then removes conditions from allies in the area on each pulse. Gain Shadow Force for each condition removed. Reduced cooldown from 50 seconds to 40 in PvP and World v World. Well of Bounty, they increase the might stacks from 6 to 8 in PvE. Is this the last one? Or we thought, yes, finally, okay. Warrior. For this update, we are focused on improving the Gun Saber, as it essentially replaces one of the Bladesworn's regular weapons. We want to make sure that the Gun Saber is a flexible kit that can play well with a broad number of other weapons. To that end, we've added a range component to a lot of its Gun Saber 1, 2, 3, as well as potential crowd control to artillery slash. The Gun Saber will still maximize its potential in melee range, but now it has a bit more flexibility in mid-range situations and a broader set of tools to draw from. So basically, if you are a warrior and you're unable to get close to the enemy, but you're right behind him, you can basically be shooting them in the back constantly with a Gun Saber. The 1, the 2, and the 3 skill are ranged. And the 1 being the auto attack, so you could just spam it. They showed Roy with a PvP target dummy, and he backed up like 20 yards back, and he was just swinging, and with every swing it was firing like a bullet from it. It was a very Final Fantasy. Now, of course, you'll do more damage, is my understanding, in melee range, but you are doing damage at range while you're trying to close that gap. Or if you're in PvE and you're forced to back away from the boss during a certain mechanic, your damage doesn't just drop to 0. Do you guys see this, Paul? I'm being told I'm being too loud. Hey, buddy, what's up? Your damage doesn't drop to 0. It just will go down a bit, just like everybody else, and then come back. Okay, Spellbreaker has become a dominant force in PvP over the last few months, and in this update, we're targeting some of its sustained potential with adjustments to Banner of Defense and Adrenal Health. We've also adjusted the way that Full Counter interacts with traits like Adrenal Health, which now requires a successful strike instead of triggering when blocking an attack. I'll repeat that. Full Counter has to hit somebody to then trigger the traits associated with it, not just block a hit from like super long range. Our goal is to introduce some counterplay that many burst skills have. So, for example, if the enemy is really good at they see the full counter and then they stop hitting you and hit the brakes, and then your full counter runs out, you're not going to get the benefit of those skills. However, if they're not good at that, then you'll still get the benefit of those skills. Core changes. Counter Blow. Reduce the cooldown from 8 seconds to 7 in competitive. Pummel Bash now grants barrier if it strikes an enemy that is using a skill. Savage Leap increase the power coefficient from 0.75 to 1.15 in competitive. Final Thrust now inflicts a reduced amount of bleeding to targets above 50% health, reduced cooldown from 15 to 12 in PvP and World v World. Dolyak's Signet increased the base healing from 1k to 1.6k, reduced stability duration from 6 seconds to 4 in PvP, reduced cooldown from 60 to 40 in PvP. Balanced Stance, reduced cooldown in PvP. Signet of Stamina, reduced cooldown, increase endurance gain by double in PvP. Frenzy, reduced cooldown everywhere. Banner of Defense, reduced cooldown in PvP. Fierce Blow, oh, I'm sorry, I read this one wrong. Banner of Defense, increased cooldown in PvP. Apologies, going from 30 seconds to 40. Fierce Blow, increased cooldown from 4 to 5 in PvP. Adrenal Health, reduced the base heal per stack from 87 to 70 in PvP. And Martial Cadence, reduced the quickness duration from 3 seconds to 2. So I was completely out of the loop on this. I didn't know this was a thing. Apparently there were groups with just like 1 Alak healer and 4 Bladesworns. And each Bladesworn with Martial Cadence would provide like 1/4 of the total quickness needed for permanent quickness. So by their powers combined, you had 4 DPSers doing substantially more DPS than what a quickness DPS would usually provide, and they were also providing quickness. I didn't even know this was a thing. I just found out about it today, but they're trying to make, they don't like that, and so they're changing that, I guess. So, you know, next meta, 5 Bladesworn. Berserker. Arc Divider. Increase the power coefficient per strike from 1.4 to 1.5. Shattering Blow, reduce the cooldown from 20 to 15 in competitive. Sundering Leap, this skill now grants Aegis on activation, reduce the cooldown to 15 seconds in all game modes. Reduce the power coefficient slightly in competitive and also in PvE. Decrease Berserk mode extension from 5 seconds to 3 in PvE only. Outrage, reduce the cooldown from 20 seconds to 18 in PvP and World v World. Dead or Alive, increase Blood Reckoning duration from 2.5 to 3 seconds. Eternal Champion, this trait has been reworked. It now grants stability and endurance when entering Berserk mode. And, this one's big, it causes all traits that trigger when entering Berserk mode to also trigger when exiting Berserk mode. Now, they talked on this for quite some time, and this actually has another component that I'm not seeing written here. It allows you to choose, actually, I don't know if this is baseline or if it's attached to Eternal Champion. However, they showed on stream a Berserker that could choose when they left Berserk mode. So he was in Berserk, he was busting heads, and then whenever he wanted, he could hit the button again, leave Berserk at his choosing, and then all his traits would activate again. And that was like really big. So, you know, there's a lot of traits in the Berserker tree that is like, do this thing when you enter Berserk mode. You are now going to get all of those again when you leave, and you can choose when you leave. Now, I don't know if it's choose when you leave baseline Berserker or choose when you leave with the Eternal Champion trait, but they did show that. They did show that on stream. Okay, continuing on to Spellbreaker. Full Counter. This skill will now trigger traits that trigger on burst skill usage when when Full Counter strikes an enemy instead of when Full Counter absorbs an attack. So again, this is, I think, to make it, you know, more of the Spellbreaker being the up front, in your face, like parrying blows and stuff like that kind of person, rather than like, you know, countering from much further away than intended. Breaching Strike, this one's a biggie. Reduce bonus damage against enemies with no boons from 50% to 5 in PvP and World v World. Now, this is substantial. I do not think this is going to kill Spellbreaker. Spellbreaker is still capable of stun locking you for such a long time if you're out of stun breaks, and you know, any damage they do will eventually wear you down. And if there's a team fight going on and other people are damaging you while you're getting stun locked, it's still going to be severe. But they're going to be popping you like a balloon less than before. And I gotta say, I kind of laughed when they showed this on stream. They said, and we're going to be nerfing Breaching Strike by just a tad. We were like, a tad? A tad. Like, these were the words on stream when they said, a tad. Continuing on to Bladesworn. Okay, so we've already touched on this. Many of the gun saber skills are ranged now. This Swift Cut now fires an additional projectile after the melee slash, but if they were hit by the melee, they take less damage from the projectile. Steel Divide, same thing. Explosive Thrust. The secondary explosion portion of the skill is now ranged. Enemies hit by the melee take less damage from the ranged. Blooming Fire. This skill no longer causes explosions along the length of your strike. Instead, the skill now launches a projectile at your target, shattering on contact and causing multiple explosions. Artillery Slash. This skill now consumes all ammo when used, granting bonus damage and different effects based on the amount of ammo consumed. And finally, Cyclone Trigger. This skill now applies Aegis to the caster in addition to other effects. Now, they talked about this one for a little while. They considered just making it block all attacks for the duration, which is like, 1 point something seconds. However, they opted to do this to make it more skill-based. So, like, if you see an enemy is doing something really big, you can hit that Aegis on Cyclone Trigger, which I believe has 2 charges if memory serves. Someone will correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, max count 2. And you can just use a charge of Cyclone Trigger and block that 1 attack with your 1 Aegis to make it more skill-based. The skill now blocks missiles as soon as it's activated. The total duration of the block remains the same. So, and keep in mind, Aegis is more than missiles, so you could block any attack with the Aegis, and then it always blocks missiles during its short duration. Whew! Okay, that's everything. Now, again, if there's anything here that you have a lot of feedback on, they have allowed us 2 weeks to give them feedback. And they said, Roy Marks is going to be reading that feedback for virtually the entire weekend. So if you have anything to add, and here's a bunch of people that have already added their lovely 2 cents, I will have links to the balance update on the forums, as well as the balance update on the wiki, but it's the forums where you leave your feedback in the description down below. So if you've got any questions, problems, thoughts, or concerns, be sure to put it down there. Tell them to buff Rangers as much as possible, and I will see y'all in the next video.